Welcome to the first episode of Æther, the podcast for the flagship professional strategic journal of the Department of the Air Force, Æther, a journal of strategic airpower and spacepower. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Thurston Goodrow. Today, we are pleased and honored to be joined by Dr. Chris Cain, U.S. Air Force retired. Chris was the first editor of Strategic Studies Quarterly, or SSQ, the journal that was launched in early 2007 and was renamed this year to Æther, a journal of strategic airpower and spacepower. Dr. Cain was a B-52 radar navigator for 12 years. He attended Air Command and Staff College and Air War College. He earned his PhD in military history from the Ohio State University before becoming the editor of Air and Spacepower Journal and SSQ. He served as the Dean of Education at Air Command and Staff College, the Deputy Director of the Air Force Research Institute, and as the Chief Academic Affairs at Air University Headquarters. Welcome to Æther, Chris.
Oh, thanks, Laura, and thank you for having me, and congratulations on launching a new journal.
Thank you very much. Before we discuss the new issue, I'd like to have you tell listeners about the genesis of SSQ.
Yeah, SSQ grew out of senior leader conversations that pointed to a need for airmen to develop and exchange strategic insights because airspace and cyber power achieve strategic effects in ways that other domains cannot. The concepts and ideas that rely on and capitalize on those effects requires a professional forum. General Steve Lorenz, who was then the commander of Air University, challenged the SSQ team to create a forum for military, government, and academic professionals to expand the boundaries of how best to employ air, space, and cyber power to achieve national security goals and objectives. So we were able to get the journal running, and it had a great run.
Yes, it really did. And as you know very well, in your time doing this, planning a professional journal is a bit like a dice roll, especially today when journals like ours feel like they must compete with the news of the day, the night, the hour, and the minute. Currency is critical, and it's difficult to see outside that cyclone to matters that really matter in the mid and the long term. But as you know, currency is important, at least in getting attention among the scrolling, and in today's climate, the doom scrolling. So when we planned this first issue, we knew it was important to feature multiple elements: leading Air Force and Space Force voices, noteworthy Air Force civilian scholars, and finally, to ground the journal in its Department of the Air Force roots, preeminent air power thinkers whose works have become essential reading in professional Air Force military education. The journal is also working to reestablish scholarly relationships with our NATO and EU allies and partners, and our issue includes a contribution by a leading British air power thinker. As you know, you never know who's going to agree to write when you solicit content, but we are pleased with the results. In fact, we achieved unplanned but welcome internal consistency, so much so that we were able to title the scholarly contributions the fine print. Policy has its role, but the rub often is in how policy plays out when implemented. For the benefit of those who have not yet read it, the issue leads with articles by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General C.Q. Brown, and the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Joanne Bass. The issue has 5 articles by current and retired Air Force general officers, including the Commander of United States Transportation Command, General Jacqueline Van Ovost. The section I mentioned a minute ago, the fine print, features 4 articles by current Air Force civilian scholars, including Dr. Heather Venable, Dr. Everett Dolman, and Dr. Karen Gatteri, all of Air University, and Dr. Mary Beth Ulrich, currently of the Air Force Academy. The third section includes contemporary articles by leading air power scholars Dr. Robert Pape, Dr. Mark Clodfelter, and John Warden. The issue concludes with a reprint of a contemporary look at air power from Air Vice Marshal Johnny Stringer of the Royal Air Force. Chris, what are your impressions of the strengths of the issue, and what challenges do the authors lay out?
Well, Laura, let me again congratulate you. This is, if you were looking for, a home run at any issue of the journal, the first issue is a good one to have a home run on, and the slate of authors that you have was just fantastic. The topics seemed to you couldn't have planned it any better as if you were looking to build an integrated theme or set of themes in the journal. And I think it's just a great product and a great way to get the new product launched. You're always going to have people that are going to say, well, it wasn't this or it wasn't that. But I can find little to criticize in here. You've got some great voices, some great perspectives. They all point to the strengths of airspace and cyber power, and they all challenge us to think about how we can use those capabilities in those domains to great strategic effect. So I think this is a solid home run. And if you can keep up this trend, then you're going to have it's something that people are going to look forward to as they either look to their inbox or as they prepare, hopefully more, to write and contribute and become part of the conversation.
This is true. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, I think that if you go and you see that the people that you've got here are leading from the front, then that's only going to encourage like-minded authors to jump into the fray. It's a tough thing, when you're out there writing and putting your ideas out there for public consumption. You're going to find that not everyone's going to agree with you, but the quality of the articles, the quality of the way that you've assembled them is something that would both suggest to potential contributors, well, this is something I want to be part of, and it's also something that they can see that this is a mature, strategic level conversation, and I can't think of any reason why people would not want to be part of that.
That's really true, and you're right. Part of the challenge of a journal is to not only provide relevant content for decision makers and interested people and people who would like to do more research on a subject, but also encourage those new voices, or as in the case of Dr. Pape and Dr. Clodfelter and John Warden, people to come back after quite a bit of time out of that sort of Airpower, in that case, Airpower spotlight. So we were pleased to loop that in.
Yeah, and if we needed evidence that this kind of exchange was necessary and an essential part of our profession, we have to look no farther than current events. Right. Things that are going on in Ukraine, the sort of slow boil, or maybe it's not so slow, things in the Indo-Pacific theater, and our continuing issues that are going on in the Middle East, even though our attention is drawn elsewhere, those things cannot go ignored. So we really need creative ideas. General Brown mentioned a couple of years ago in his Accelerate, Change, or Lose challenge. He said, we have to think creatively. I think it was Winston Churchill that said, we're out of money, so we've got to think now. So he said, if we can't solve the problems in more creative and innovative ways, in other words, accelerate change, then we will lose the next conflict. And that's not a situation that anyone wants, but he's also empowered people in that accelerator, change or lose vision. He said, I want to empower airmen to go out there and do what it takes to prevent a future loss or even a tie. So we want to maintain the dominance. And I think that set the stage for a journal like Æther to come along. And so that's the strategic context that we're talking about now. It's not one of those things where our guaranteed dominance across the domains is assured. We want to do whatever steps are necessary to meet those competitors who have been going to school on how we do business over the last 30 years. Since August of 1990, when Operation Desert Shield started. Mm-hmm. We want they've been studying us. We've been pretty open. All you have to do is watch the news to see how we operate, and they've paid attention. Now it's our turn to up the ante, to take airspace and cyber power to levels that no one else can imagine.
Right. And on that of the watching and the learning, it's tragic what's happening in Ukraine, but it's really, I think this is going to be a period of a lot of thinking about air power theory and space power theory and what works and what doesn't, and what sort of conflicts we fight and how we fight them. It'll be interesting to see what emerges in thought in the next year from this.
No, I agree. The kinds of wars that we've been fighting over the last 30 years, and the mechanisms that we have used to do so are obviously not being employed in Ukraine, and that is tragic. It is regrettable, but we have to realize that sort of mirror imaging ourselves is one of the things that we have to get away from. We have to take the conflict that we see as it comes. I think it was Colonel Warden's article that said, we will fight the next war with the concepts and the tools that we have when it starts. We can't afford to wait for to come up with some new strategic insight, because the pressures of war and the tools that we have are going to be all we have in the kit at the time.
Right. Yes, Tim. And, I thought Lieutenant General Hinote's article really got at that other side of things, the outcome that nobody likes to talk about. What if we do lose, and those implications?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. General Hinote is a good friend, and one of those people that has thought deeply about airspace and cyber power for many years. And if he is raising a caution to us, if he is explaining how the pathway that we've been on since 1990 could lead to a defeat, then we better sit up and pay attention. And I think that as he traces that fictional historical timeline in his article, where he says, okay, we thought we were doing everything right. We thought that we were applying the tools that we have to best effect, only to find out that as we did so, we were sketching out a strategy for an adversary in the future to apply against us. Right. And I think that's one of the things that maybe we don't pay enough attention to, is to try to get inside the enemy's head, not to learn what they are doing or what they're thinking, but to learn how they are perceiving us, how they would apply whatever tools they have. And they may not be the highest tech tools. That's the challenge in General Brown's paper as well. Yes, we have technologies. We want to develop the best technologies. We want to seize the march on the future as far as a technological leap when that's possible. But the real trick is to understand how the enemy is going to be perceiving us and trying to get around our strengths, as well as to exploit our weaknesses. And General Hinote puts us a very sobering view, almost I hate to say it, but a mournful view right. of what that future could be if we do not do something about it today. Right.
And one of the ways that we are doing that is through domain changes and declarations of domains. And Lieutenant General Shaw and his co-authors Gene Ferguson and Amy Salou, they really get at that in their article. That sort of changed one of the big shifts that we're seeing now in the Department of the Air Force and Space Force and Space Command.
Yeah, I was very pleased to see this because, as you know, The decision to stand up and use service to break out those capabilities away from the traditional services is controversial and will continue to be so. And it was great to see a senior leader like General Shaw and Major Ferguson and Captain Solo collaborate to propose some ideas about how space is different and why organizing, training, and equipping for that difference is important to national security. The first part of it that I just kind of hit me in the face was this definition of area of responsibility and how the terrestrial perspective does not apply.
Right.
And I think, well, if you're going to go back and examine, and if the juice is going to be worth the squeeze on a space command, then the first thing you have to think about are those fundamentals, and just the domain itself does not, as they point out, it does not lend itself to using the same kind of language, the same kind of definitions. And I was really glad to see and interested to see their perspective on area of responsibility. And then the four propositions. The first one is, and I saw something very similar to this with Jeff Bezos when he was talking about colonization. There's a lot of stuff about going to Mars, and maybe that'll happen one day. But Bezos, as well as these authors, said that Earth is a unique place in the galaxy, in the universe. It's the only place where humans have come to grow and flourish. There's a lot of really hostile places out there that could not support human existence. And this Alpha Prime is like, the Earth is the only place currently able to sustain human existence. And I think that's a very, very important thing to ground our space doctrine and our space theory. We can't think about going to the moon and establishing a colony in the near term because there's so many just physical barriers to that. Getting to Mars is even further, in the future, and it will be a hostile struggle. So let's think about the home planet, and let's think about what it takes to protect it, to preserve it, to operate and defend it. Because if we don't, as our first organizing principle, then some very bad things can happen. So I think that's a great proposition. The second thing that they talked about was that we can no longer think about traditional security concerns. It's not a global problem anymore. It goes what they call supra-global. In other words, we go from the surface to potentially infinity, if you think about threats from asteroids and comets and things like that. So when you organize, train, and equip from that standpoint, from that perspective, then it changes how you might do some things. It changes your priorities, and I think that that's critical to this new organizing principle. Third, we think about key terrain, whether it's using land power, sea power with the sea lines of communication, or even the concept of air superiority is rooted in controlling the skies over key terrain or denying the use of those things. Those concepts have little meaning in space, or they change significantly. And I think that's something that we, as grounded in our air perspective, might give a little bit of short shrift to. And I think calling attention to it as a defining proposition of the domain is very important. And then finally, we can't withdraw from space. Space is essential to our success in the other domains. So it's not ancillary. It's not an add-on. Whether any capability that you mention in the space domain is something that sets our mode of operations in every other domain up for success. And I think that if we start thinking about it in that way, rather than thinking about it as a supporting force, instead as an essential force, then I think it would change our perspective. So to me, this is one of those sort of watershed articles. It really does establish a critical rationale for how we are organizing training and equipping for national defense, and space is a co-equal part of the joint force now.
Right. And one of those I mentioned earlier, the unplanned coincidences or happy coincidences, was Everett Dolman's article, which goes more into the the theory and this kind of the doctrine piece of what a space domain is, and it's a nice complement to General Shaw's article.
Yeah, and Dr. Dolman's been writing about this for many years, and he has been a voice of balance and reason in what has often been a very emotional debate about how we organize our capabilities for space. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Having a senior leader like General Shaw and his team come out and then have Dr. Dolman come back into the conversation just adds a layer of depth, a layer of credibility and perspective that this is not, while it is a political decision to organize the way that we are now organized, it is not merely a political decision. It is a strategic decision to set us up for future success. So I think that when you have a solid conceptual foundation like the one that Dr. Dolman has represented, combined with the strategic and operational perspective that you see in General Shaw's article, now you're starting to see the maturation of a capability that will integrate seamlessly with our other domains. So I think that if I were, I use articles from our professional journals when I teach for the Global College of PME. And so all of these articles are now, I send them out to my students to supplement their readings and give them a bit of a summary. Say, okay, take a look at this, because this is now how we are thinking about. This is not something where we're fighting the last war with the tools of the past. This is actually what's going on in the future. You're getting a glimpse into the future. And I think that if you look at these two articles together, you get a pretty good outline of where our guardians are going.
Right. And earlier, that all involves conversations about resourcing and budgeting. And I thought it was kind of neat when Dr. Venables sort of challenged the notion of accelerating change being based on technical innovation, and that sort of being maybe sometimes too much of a shiny object. So I thought her, weighing in on let's give that a second thought provided some, like you said, with the previous two articles we were just discussing, there's sort of the policy piece, and then there's the, we're thinking more deeply about it.
Yeah, Dr. Venables got a good point, and she provides some good case studies, some good cautionary tales for us. It's like, well, we've tried this using technology as our primary focus in the past, and let's not step into those buckets again. Let's not trip ourselves up. I I um, I think that General Brown has asked us not to focus solely on the technology, certainly because of our acquisition timelines, because of the complexity of bringing weapon systems on board, because of the integration required of maintenance, logistics, and more importantly, human capital. Um, I think that General Brown has issued a much more nuanced call for accelerating change, innovating, and adapting than focusing solely on technology. However, um, it is our adversaries are catching up with our investments in technology faster than you could have expected. Part of that is because we have been consuming our technologies over the past 30 years. They've been in combat. It accelerates the decline of a technology. It exposes your capabilities to your adversaries so that they can see what you are doing. They can see how you're employing them. They can see what those capabilities are. And it's a cheap way for them, as long as they're not fighting you, it's a cheap way for them to launch a catch-up program. That's been happening. Now, if we are going to avoid a similar capabilities fight, we're going to have to do something in both technology and in concept. And I think Dr. Venable's like, well, let's not focus solely on the technology. Let's focus on the doctrine. Let's focus on the theory. Let's focus on the concepts, the strategies that make the most advantage of those technologies that we can afford, that we intend to purchase. To me, and again, I was involved across Air University for many, many years.
Right.
To me, our investments in human capital are as critical as our investments in technologies. And I think they're going to become more so when you think about the requirements to develop a space professional, a cyber professional, with the truly leading world-class capabilities. We have to think very, very deeply about altering our human capital development systems so that we can not only have the greatest technology, but have people that are as competent or more so than the technologies that we put in their hands. So
Right.
I was very glad to see her raise a caution flag on this, to see that we are now in a period where it's not an interwar period anymore. It is the period where we are actually getting ready to fight within, hopefully, a long time, but maybe the next 10 years we might be fighting a peer competitor, and we better start thinking about that integration of technology, human capital, doctrine, and strategy.
Yes, you raised the issue of human capital, and I think that segues nicely into the article by Dr. Guattari and the article by Dr. Ulrich, both dealing with different aspects of human capital, but how we train the next generation of airmen and guardians and enlisted and officers to meet those challenges that they're going to face as they fight that war.
Yeah, and I would also throw in there Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force Bass, where she was talking about information war.
Yes, exactly.
I was a Cold Warrior. I was part of the last generation of the Cold War, and things, looking back on it, things seem rather simple. You had one place to point the guns, and it was there was a fairly well-defined expectation of how things would unfold. and you were integrated with a strategy of containment and deterrence. So it was pretty easy. These days, you don't know where the threat's going to come from. It's going to be probably beginning with an information campaign. Hopefully not at home. Hopefully it's one of those things, as Dr. Ulrich says, we have to invest in fundamental concepts that people of my generation took for granted.
Right.
We cannot take things for granted, that people understand the foundational elements of our democracy. And we also have to recognize that in the information age, in an information war, which will be maybe the current that runs through all future conflicts, we have to become attuned to attempts to divide and conquer. And so investments in both how to develop that sense, that ability to perceive very subtle, very sophisticated attacks, and then preparing our airmen to recognize and counter them is going to be something that requires a great deal of time, a great deal of our educational enterprise as far as investments, and to really see this as a warfighting competency, not just as ancillary training in the future. So I think those three articles together, leading off with Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force Bass,
right,
and then connecting her concerns over information warfare to the concerns of preserving our oath to protect the Constitution, to understand what that means, and then integrating it with warfighting concepts, as Dr. Guterres says, is just it's a nice, a nicely woven theme that is part of this issue that makes it so effective and important.
Yes, and you've mentioned a couple of times, talked about the type of warfare. We've been preparing, or trying to prepare for strategic competition about Joint Task Force Quartz by General Anderson and General Hines, and then retired Lieutenant General Deptula's article on JADC2, and how the points that Dr. Clodfelter brings up, and Dr. Pape as well. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. We have been struggling for 30 years, and this is not because of any fault in the Air Force. When I was, we tend to not think about that. During Operation Desert Storm in 1991, we did not have a published joint doctrine. We had Goldwater Nichols, which said we would organize and things like that. But my Air Command and Staff College class of '94 actually used draft joint publications. We were given permission by the Joint Staff. All of the intermediate service schools were given permission by the Joint Staff to use the draft joint pubs that had not yet been approved by the Joint Staff. So we fought Desert Storm without an officially published and sanctioned joint doctrine. So since then, we have been struggling to find the way to command and control, to develop strategy for air power in the context of the joint force. And I believe that the joint task force concept that General Anderson and General Hines talked about is an indicator that we're getting to the point where it's becoming the norm. That the joint combatant commanders recognize that there is a time when forming a joint task force centered around air with an air commander is the way to go. And that, that is the most effective mechanism in certain circumstances, particularly in the circumstances that they wrote about in Africa.
Right.
General Deptula sees this, and he's been writing about this and speaking about this, probably for 30 years.
Right.
So he sees this as something that, while we have had progress, he sees it as something that we have to continue to think about, to develop, to exercise, and to employ, because you never really know how things are going to go. You can have great war games, but you never know how they're going to go until you actually pull it out of the kit bag and try it out in combat. And so he's very attuned to that, but he also has a caution. He says that we are the concept, the JADC2 concept. It is a vision for something that is going to be incredibly complex. He has, been on the firing line of trying to implement those kinds of things. So let's be careful. Let's be deliberate. Let's be critical as we try to employ that concept to make sure that we get it right, and we don't actually erect barriers to how we use our air, space, and cyber power. So I think that anytime you're talking about command and control for one of our most vital and scarce resources, air power, there are going to be folks that may not have thought through it as thoroughly and as carefully as folks like General Deptula, General Anderson, General Hines, who have actually been in the wheelhouse and had to do it. And so incorporating those lessons from the folks who have done it is essential to getting to that whatever that acronym was.
Yeah.
JADC2.
Yeah, yes, it's one of the long ones. Yeah.
But I think that when you talk about the difference between fighting in a peer-to-peer war versus maybe a more asymmetric type of conflict, the political environment, the international environment certainly can be restrictive, but I think that at the same time, we're growing beyond that. It used to be, well, just turn us loose. If we didn't have all of this oversight, we weren't concerned so much about ROE. Right. But really, that is the best way to fight. Is when and this notion that we're going to compare our effectiveness to the bombing campaigns over Germany and Japan is just wrongheaded. We are not going to fight a war like we're seeing in Ukraine. We're not going to go and indiscriminately bomb. Number one, it's not ethically and morally correct, and that's not the way we will fight. Number two, it is tactically and strategically ineffective. We are going to apply our capabilities to strategic effect. And I think that's where Dr. Pape, Dr. Clodfelter's article meshed nicely with Colonel Worden's article. Right. He is laser focused on strategy. What is it that you are trying to do to achieve a strategic effect for the nation? How do you perceive the adversary as a system? How do you attack that system to achieve the effect in as rapid a time as possible with as low a cost as possible. And now as we go forward, that same concept applies in what we used to call major theater war, as well as what we used to call operations other than war. So if we think about air power in that way, think about applying our capabilities in that way, then the concerns about whether or not civilians will become depressed and overthrow their oppressors, and ask us to install democracy become less and less of a problem. We want strategic effectiveness using operational art, using our tactical expertise, and that becomes the most effective way to apply airspace and cyber power.
Yes, and Air Vice Marshal Stringer's article kind of pulls those strings as well. I felt like that was a good summary and look ahead from our good close friends in the UK.
Yeah, it's and again, he's got the perspective of watching this and being a participant over decades of being a partner to the United States. It's like we can learn a lot about how to think through these things. Back in the 2009, which is not the early days of SSQ, the second year, we hosted a conference in the UK on deterrence, which at the time we were thinking about renewing deterrence. After the Cold War, we were thinking about trying to deter non-state actors, and our partners over in the UK and in the EU, in NATO, were very excited to get together to talk through these things because they have different perspectives. And I think you see that here with the Air Vice Marshal. It's the same language, it's the same topics, it's the same concepts with a little bit of a different accent. And I think that keeping those voices connected to Æther, keeping those voices in front of our airmen and our guardians is very, very important, because they draw slightly different conclusions based upon the way they experience conflict, based upon the way that they solve the accelerate, change, or lose problem. And they've been dealing with it much, much longer than we have.
Yes. And it also helps us when we are working with our allies and partners in the types of operations that General Van Ovost was talking about in her article. Logistics are global, and I think her points are well taken in terms of how that meshes with our allies and partners and within the joint force.
Yeah, it's interesting that over the years, many articles about logistics and air mobility are just sort of a Berlin airlift revision. This is not that. General Van Ovost is talking about the integration of our logistical systems with other agencies of government, with the international community, with NGOs, with every aspect of the scenario that you may be involved in. Certainly our logistical capabilities, that multimodal capability is vital. It is a unique tool and has been since World War II in giving our senior leaders, our national leaders, the opportunity to affect things without having to resort to destructive measures, without having to resort to coercion. It is so many years ago, I wrote a paper about using air power in constructive ways versus destructive ways. And our logistics and mobility forces have been the primary engines for that. And General Van Ovost has said, look, this is a national resource. This is a national asset. And we look at this and achieve strategic effects every time that we begin a mobility operation. So I believe she is opening the aperture on thinking about how to achieve General Brown's vision. We are not going to be in permissive environments in a pure conflict. So how do we deploy the force? How do we base the force? How do we sustain the force? And how do we deal with both combat operations as well as post-conflict operations if we don't think through and sustain our already unique logistic forces? So I think this is one where people need to pay attention, read between the lines, and depart from the history. Think about the future. As General Hinote says, let's think about this and work backward from a desired future, and think about how we apply these concepts of logistics and mobility to achieve strategic effect.
Well, our time is running short, and I'd like to offer you some final closing thoughts, words of wisdom for us, or final observations on our first issue.
Well, I'm pretty sure that people who know me will say there are no words of wisdom coming from me. But again, I would like to say thank you very much for reaching out and giving me the opportunity to help with the launch of this product. You've done a fantastic job of making the transition from two very successful products with the Air and Spacepower Journal and Strategic Studies Quarterly to two new journals. And that is a phenomenal heavy lift. I know that you've had many, if not sleepless nights, restless nights over getting those things done. I would just like to challenge the readers and the listeners, be part of the conversation, get involved, even if it's to comment on an article. The authors, it encourages authors, it starts a conversation, and if it could grow into the next generation of the authors that we see here. Some of these folks, were my peers. Some of these folks were folks who inspired me as I was developing way back in the dark ages. So be the next generation of air, space, and cyber power thinkers and writers, because that's what keeps our profession alive. That's what keeps it active, and that's what keeps it relevant. And that's how we avoid the future that General Hinote so starkly sketched out in his article. So thanks again, and I just say good luck and keep it going.
Oh, thank you. It's all about a team, as you know. So I'm thankful for the team here at Air University Press and the team on the two journals, the teams of the two journals. So thank you. And Chris, I'd like to thank you for joining us for our launch of this Æther podcast. We appreciate your insights and recommendations as we move forward with our renamed journal, Æther, a journal of strategic air power and space power.